Welcome everyone. This is IC04, Telerehabilitation, an effective tool and its validation throughout the curriculum. I am Mary Goldberg. I will be moderating today's session and will provide the CEU code at the end. Before we get started, please remember to mute yourself. Questions can be asked using the chat feature. I will go ahead and turn it over to Madeline Kwok and Rachel Szymanski, your presenters for this session. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Madeline Kwok, and I'll be presenting with Rachel Szymanski today for ISS. We are a physical therapist and occupational therapist, respectively, in the spinal cord injury and disorder rehab department at James J. Peters VA Medical Center. We work primarily with the SCID population, as well as with the ALS and the MS population. We want to give an overview of how we use telerehab pre-pandemic times, during pandemic times, and since we're still in the thick of it, hopefully how we will use it in the future for post-pandemic times. Our objectives are straightforward. We want to describe the role of telerehab technologies for PTs and OTs when caring for our SCID, ALS, and MS population. We want to identify advantages and disadvantages when providing interventions. And we want to discuss the future use of telerehab technologies post-pandemic. At this point, I'm sure everyone have a sense of what telehealth is. However, just to give some very straightforward definitions, telerehab is defined as the use of information and communication technologies to provide rehab services at a distance. And then the subcategory definitions, we're talking about synchronous and asynchronous formats. Synchronous, we're talking about patient and provider connect at the same time. And asynchronous, we're talking more about emails and video recordings and being forwarded at different times. So pre-pandemic times, our SCI, ALS, and MS department at JJP were at varying stages of developing our telerehab programs. We were already starting to use it, but just very sporadically. Here are a number of different types of appointments. We have appointments that we connect with individuals directly for home evaluations, for assistive technology assessments and follow-ups. So we do a lot of patient education. Or we were using it a lot for team consultations and conferences. Most likely because we are a hub and spoke model in the VA. So we are SCID center, and we get a lot of our referrals from other facilities, or other spoke facilities. And after we finish the rehab, we wind up sending the patients back out. And the patients wind up getting their care from the spoke VA, and it's just a way that we're able to coordinate plan of care. And then we also do a lot of group sessions as well, a lot of whole health and preventative care, just some regular wellness exercises, groups, a lot of peer support meetings, individual events like adaptive sports, or a lot of one-off events. Now, we were doing that, but everything was incremental. And in our experience specifically, the way we started was that we started using VA telehealth technologies primarily in the seating clinic when we saw that there was a need. A number of years ago, we wind up evaluating patients for specialized sports equipment. So we were doing custom seating systems for athletes and molds for their monoskis and their racing chairs. And we weren't sure how to approach this, but we wind up consulting with the athletes and community sports organization and sports equipment manufacturer. And together we were able to provide these services. Otherwise, what was done in the past was that patients will go directly to these niche manufacturers, and then they will come back to the VA with a script for the VA to pay for it. And by doing this type of collaborative work, the VA was able to kind of be more integral in this process. Then, as well as we started building our relationship with our spoke VAs, we also wind up working together a lot. Oops, sorry, just shifted a couple slides in. Okay. Okay, We had a number of telehealth equipment and software in the VA over the years. In the hospital, there may be dedicated telehealth rooms with mobile stations, and they're like bigger in setup, and they're used for consultative and coordination of care. Then as technology advanced and we're able to utilize these methods more commonly, we wind up switching over to a lot of webcams and tablets and iPads. And more recent years, the VA were able to provide iPads for clinicians to log into these sessions. Patients can also use their personal device. If they have a phone or a computer, then they can log in. Or if they don't have any technology, the VA is also able to provide a lending program with internet, which is very important. And they're able to use that for their telehealth appointments for the duration. In terms of softwares that we were using, there were a few iterations. We started with analog lines and then Jabber, and now we are consistently using the Virtual Video Connect, VVC, and Video on Demand, VOD. And you might hear me reference that a few more times throughout this presentation. Okay. This slide kind of outlines what we had to do during February and March of 2020 as a response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Although previously we were using telerehab, every outpatient appointment had to be converted to virtual care as of 2020. So the demand was much greater. The staff had to meet the demand. We had to have a cultural change where how can we treat these patients from a hands-on only format to virtual care. We had to figure out how we can switch our clinic types, our appointment types, which platforms to use, which was approved and what was not allowed. We had to figure out our working environment. And some of that involved putting part of the staff to go into telework. So there were a lot of logistics to figure out. And since then, through the different waves of the pandemic and infection rates, we were able to kind of have a steady pace in terms of varying the number of in-person versus telerehab visits. Over here, you can clearly see the offerings for the virtual clinics increase. In 2019, we only had virtual care PT, OT, and then telerehab, which is more of an exercise group. Then progressively 2020 and 2021, we were a little bit more creative in terms of thinking what services we can provide for our veterans. And just to be clear, not all of these are mutually exclusive. There are many times when patients may be seen in person first, and then have follow-up appointments virtually or vice versa. So we screen the home environment first and then bring the patient in for more targeted hands-on treatment. And as a result of our efforts, because of the COVID-19 crisis, you can see the number of VBCs for PTs and OTs have increased significantly over the past 3 years, especially between 2019 and 2020. And we kind of have a steady pace in 2021. So I just wanted to give a few definitions so you know what you're looking at. The first in the kind of aqua blue is encounters. Encounters are the types of services, like what we enter for our CPT codes. Then the orange, we're looking at visits, like the number of sessions or individual appointments. And then uniques is the number of individual persons served. So in the yellow. So it's interesting that although the specific number of persons served dropped minimally, our encounters and visits increase. It just gives an indication that we as clinicians are able to utilize telerehab more broadly. And then the data correlates with the number of clinics that we've built up. Just a couple pictures of workstations adapted for telehealth services. Literally, this is my own workspace in the office and in the home. Now, ideally, you'll have 2 screens, okay? One with a camera, so one to do the actual visit, and then the other one is to pull up the patient's chart. Also, having multiple screens will allow me to be more nimble and flexible if I just want to log into the internet and pull up a product and go over the specs. For example, if we're doing a home evaluation, so we can go over some technical specifications with them. And then in addition to that, if we run into technical difficulties, we have a phone just in case if we need to reach the patient directly, or if we need to call for backup. Sometimes we need technical assistance from our telehealth coordinator who is there and ready to assist if need be. So in March 2020, inpatients were face-to-face, and our in-house therapists were mainly treating inpatients. However, we were putting all of our outpatients on VBCs, at least for a short period of time. At that point, we assessed their clinical needs as well as if they're able to do telerehab. We were able to identify who has technology and the support system, maybe family members, to assist with logistics of a VBC. If people need equipment, then we will communicate this with our telehealth coordinator. At this time, this present time, we're triaging clinical needs as well as patient preference and make a clinical judgment if they are going to be seen in person or virtually. Now I'm going to go over some types of PT services that we have here. And these are just some common services and not necessarily an exhaustive list. Also, our clinics are highly collaborative. So for example, the home eval, which I have some pictures on the side, is usually done by PT and OT together to give their unique perspective. And Rachel will actually get into some more specifics regarding the home evals later in this presentation. Other services that we see patients for are typical rehab things like transfer training or balance training. However, we have to make sure that the recommendations and the training are safe. So we might recruit a family member with the setup and the camera holding, or we might have the patient set up their space so that they have a chair behind them, or if they're doing sit to stand, maybe put the chair against a wall, something to hold on to, just little things like that. We also do a lot of home exercise programs. So oftentimes we do a handout of some sort, maybe through MedBridge or maybe through HP2Go or something like that, or we can create our own. And then we send it out through secure messaging. And then we're able to pull it up when we have our session, and we can tweak the exercise and troubleshoot through things with the patients in real time. Now, the wheelchair clinic is really where I spent most of my time in the clinic, and it's actually very pertinent for our patient population. I want to go over the process in terms of when we're evaluating somebody. Prior to the COVID-19 crisis, everything was in person. We would have in-clinic evaluations. We'll do your typical mat evals, the measurements, troweling equipment, and that may take multiple sessions. Then when we figure everything out, we order the equipment, we bring the patient back for a fitting, and we dial everything in and send them out. Afterwards, we may do a follow-up session in person or virtual. It can vary. During COVID-19 though, everything was virtual and the decision-making was very complicated. We really had to figure out a process. We had to see, can we do everything virtually, or can we do somewhat of a hybrid where we need to send a tech out to do certain things like adjustments and trialing bringing equipment in for trial. So it was a complicated process, to say the least. And at the present time, we do a hybrid of everything. So everything is a case-by-case scenario. We're able to identify what we need to do, what requires hands-on care, maybe some positioning education to begin with. And however, there might be times where a virtual care may be sufficient, where they're making adjustments and troubleshooting some mechanical things. We're able to do certain things virtually. So at the present time, I think we're able to take what we learned and go by a case-by-case scenario. Over here, I just want to outline quickly what we did during the pandemic, the process. Like if we need to send a vendor in because they needed to do a couple measurements for us or trial some equipment, we had to make sure that everybody was following infection control protocols and how to minimize the risk for exposure. So that took a lot of thought and a lot of coordination for the vendors and the patients to kind of comply with all of these kind of guidelines. I want to discuss a few cases. So the first case, we have a veteran with a progressive ALS who was evaluated for a power wheelchair with a foot and leg switch controls. He was still ambulatory for household distances at the time, and we were told by our ALS clinicians that he's likely going to need a chair very soon. That was in February 11, 2020. So we did a lot of in-person training and trials in February, and we ordered the equipment on February 24th, 2020. However, when the equipment arrived to the clinic, that was when things were closed down, and we decided to do some basic training through our video sessions, like how to manage a chair, how to charge a chair, how to do the attendant, what is the seating, a lot of that stuff preliminarily. Then we coordinated for the chair to be delivered to the home, and because we knew that training was going to be tricky, doing a foot control, we decided to just turn on the attendant control. So we had a wheelchair tech go and deliver the chair. But to our surprise, there were a couple troubleshooting issues that came up already. And one of them was just getting the chair inside the home. What they did was they modified their home so they had a vertical platform lift. And when the lift came up to the landing, they had to make an immediate turn into the house. But there was a storm door that was opening into the vertical platform lift opening, so the chair could not get through and around and enter the house. So we had to kind of figure out a plan from there, and we wind up storing the chair in an outdoor shed where they had an outlet and just a covering to protect the chair. And in the meantime, they were going to work on the storm door, and then we were going to work on training and programming with the patient outside in the driveway and outdoor training so that they have a little bit more space to navigate. So we did a few training sessions, and we brought the vendor in also to tweak some of the programming and positioning of the switches. And after a few sessions, by July 6th, 2020, everything was fixed. He was able to drive the chair, and the door was fixed so that they can open wide and the chair can be taken inside the house. I just wanted to show our screen the way it looks when we do a VVC. At this point, our interface have changed slightly so that we can spotlight people. And then on the side over here, we can see that we can have multiple people on, other family members, other disciplines, vendors, etc. But our VA is kind of committed to making our program a little bit more user-friendly. So as you see in the previous slide, we had multiple follow-up sessions, which is typical for people with progressive ALS diagnosis. But this was, I have to say, a few extra visits and a little bit more coordination. But because we had all those virtual visits, we were able to identify that there was a little bit of veering when they were going up and down the slope and the sidewalk. And then we were also able to identify this issue. This is the vertical platform lift, and then this is the storm door. So that the door before was just getting in the way and we couldn't navigate the chair inside the door, but they were able to figure out the hinges to make it work. Okay, so the second case is a little bit more of a straightforward scenario. We had a patient with a C6 Asia C spinal cord injury who needed a new chair. And he has been injured for quite a few years, so he knows what he wants, and we're ordering a new chair that's based on what he has. But it was just mechanically, things were needing to get fixed all the time, so we needed to get him a new chair. So we got a new chair with a new seating system that was similar, and that was in March 5th, 2020. By the time it came, everything was virtual, so we were calling the patient. He didn't really want to come in, but he wanted to come in when things kind of calmed down with the pandemic. So we held off. And then finally in June, after a few correspondence, the patient was saying that, I think I'm ready for my chair. So we wind up doing a virtual visit where we did a virtual fitting. The tech was out there and they were able to make some adjustments. Not everything was 100% because it was a newer model. So we had to order a few minor parts. I think just a longer armrest pad, an extra link for the headrest. But after that, we had just another quick follow-up fitting, and everything was done virtually in June 29th, 2020. The last case is more present. This was done in September, actually. So we had a patient with a T7 Asia B spinal cord injury since 2016. And he needed to be seen because he was developing a sacral wound. The patient attributes this to a recent weight loss and he was sliding in the chair. The doctor saw that he had a wound and he asked us to see him. I called the patient and he was saying that he lives an hour and a half away. He didn't want to go to the local VA and he didn't want to come into clinic either because he didn't want to sit for all that time in a vehicle. So we came up with a plan. So we did a video visit the very next day with a wheelchair tech present, and we were able to do a lot of adjustments, changing the backrest angle, increasing the seat depth a little bit. So changing the squeeze in the chair so he's not sliding as much. We're able to do most of the adjustments so that he was feeling more balanced and more comfortable in the chair. Then we try to coordinate a plan with him. We had a follow-up phone call a week later, and we scheduled an in-person visit on October 12, 2021, because his wound was healing. He said he just needed a little extra time. So by October 12th, we saw that the wound was completely healed, and then we finalized the adjustments on the back and very minor stuff. But he also wanted to come in because he wanted a new chair, his weight was changing, and just the little adjustments wasn't able to address everything 100%. So he came in to do some equipment trialing, and we were able to do an evaluation for a new chair and a fitting. But this is an example of a hybrid approach where we're able to kind of log in quickly and address the patient's concerns very timely. And now I'm going to pass the mic over to Rachel, who will get into telerehab in the occupational therapy space.
Thank you, Madeline. Hello, everyone. My name is Rachel Szymanski, and I'll be talking to you today about telerehabilitation from an OT perspective. To get started, let's go ahead and review some of the methods and materials. As Madeline mentioned earlier, we have synchronous and asynchronous means for providing virtual interventions. Synchronous methods are provided via phone or video in real time. Over the phone, we can provide patient education and help guide basic problem solving for common concerns. Individual video visits usually run for 30 to 60 minutes, depending upon the interventions provided, such as ADL retraining or therapeutic exercises. Group visits are used when we're connecting with multiple veterans at once for virtual clinics, such as peer support or telerehab. Any interventions not happening in real time are considered asynchronous, which is typically done through our VA secure messaging platform. Secure messaging is used to respond to repair requests and send follow-ups like home exercise programs, tracking sheets, or specific product information. We also use it to share educational handouts and splitware schedules. I do want to make mention here that one of the features we have within the secure messaging platform is the option to upload messages directly to our electronic patient record system, so that important information is easily added to the veterans chart as needed. Going back to before the pandemic in 2018 BC, or before COVID, my clinical practice was 95% of the time hands-on, inpatient, direct patient care. It was about 4% spent on asynchronous interventions through secure messaging and 1% for video visits. I know this because February 15th, 2018 was my very first virtual visit ever for a home evaluation. Video visits back then felt kind of awkward and seemed counterintuitive to what we knew as therapists. 2019, however, as Madeline pointed out earlier, was really when we started to use video visits a bit more in our clinic. We were gradually becoming more comfortable with the concept, but it was not yet common practice. Everything changed in 2020, as we all know, and all signs for us pointed toward telerehab. Necessity really was the mother of all of our inventions, our virtual interventions. Even though we weren't inventing telehealth, technically it's been around in the VA since 2003, we were inventing new and practical uses for the virtual platforms that were available to us. As the pandemic unfolded in New York City, we were figuring things out as we went along, developing new protocols and constantly readjusting to the changing dynamics of the situation so that we could continue to provide patient-centered care to our outpatient SCI veterans amid shutdowns and uncertain times. For a brief time, we were also given special permission by the VA to use FaceTime and WhatsApp as alternative means to our VVC platform, because our system was struggling to handle this new surge in virtual appointments. This influx, though, was not only coming from our VA, but also from VA hospitals and veteran care centers across the country. Needless to say, transitioning to virtual care services during 2020 was also a learning curve for our veterans, especially for our older adult population. Moving along, somewhere toward the end of 2020 and into 2021, things started to calm down a bit. We were able to refine our processes and get a good flow going to where virtual visits started to feel second nature. And even now that we've welcomed back our outpatients into the clinic for in-person visits, many prefer to still use virtual appointments when possible to avoid the hassle of commuting in. And now here we are at the start of 2022, and it feels like we've been doing virtual visits for much longer than we actually have. Our current hybrid approach seems to be the best of both worlds, and from my experience, is something here to stay. I'm sure those of you who have had the opportunity to engage in telehealth practices would agree there's definitely an adjustment period. I know that I had to rethink my skill set and approach. For example, range of motion and manual muscle testing are strictly based on observation, so long as it's safe for the veteran to perform. There's also a lot of time spent on clarification and asking questions, especially when determining FIM levels. We can still use our rating scales and even screen share them if needed during our sessions. We can send questionnaires for our veterans to fill out prior to our virtual visit via secure messaging, so that we can then maximize our time on the video call. Also, when a veteran has a home health aide, partner, or caregiver available, we often recruit them to help us. They're really helpful, whether it's taking measurements for a home evaluation, holding the camera at a different angle so we can get a better view of the exercise being performed by our veteran, or simply aiding in the initial setup for the virtual visit itself. This is especially important for our veterans with high-level injuries. What I've learned from this ongoing experience is that virtual OT interventions are not impossible. You just have to be more creative and think outside the box when implementing them. Looking back on my notes over the past 2 to 3 years, I surprised myself a bit when I realized I had covered all of the practice areas listed here, which is significantly more than I initially thought was going to be possible via video. For example, addressing ADLs at a distance was a fun challenge. That's not to say it was easy. I did a lot of planning and forward thinking, and I certainly gave our prosthetics department quite the task of filling adaptive equipment orders, but it worked. Of course, I was not always working alone. Some of the interventions listed here required a lot of help from our vendors, especially with home evaluations. We do rely a lot on our vendors to complete the formal at-home assessments for the ceiling lifts, ramps, and vertical platform lifts we recommend. And for ECU evaluations, one of our vendors is particularly helpful in pairing, programming, and providing in-home training for the use of off-the-shelf smart home products. I could easily go into much more detail about each of these interventions and the learning curves I experienced throughout the pandemic. But given our time today, I picked a couple of key examples to share with you in this presentation. This virtual home evaluation was for a 60-year-old veteran who was admitted to our spinal cord unit from Helen Hayes Hospital back in October of 2020. The veteran had been involved in a swimming accident in early September, which resulted in incomplete tetraplegia. His injury was classified as C4 Asia C with a C7 motor level. His home was located in New York State, about 2 hours north of New York City, where he was living with his wife and one of his young adult daughters. This is a 2-story family home with 8 steps to enter through the front and 3 steps to enter through the back. He and his family had already started the process of home renovations while he was at Helen Hayes Hospital. With all of the bedrooms and bathrooms located upstairs, their plan was to convert one of their living rooms into a bedroom and build out a half bath into a fully accessible bathroom on the main level. When I first started working with this veteran, the bathroom area was completely gutted and looked similar to the photo on the far left, which, as you can see, is quite a difference from the finished bathroom he went home to on the right. It was definitely a process, which I outlined for you in the next slide. 2 weeks after the veteran was admitted, we had our first video visit with his wife and contractor. The 4 of us discussed ideas for the bathroom layout, ADA guidelines, and DME needs following a spinal cord injury. Our next virtual visit was with the veteran's wife and daughter to assess ingress and egress points. We had decided on a vertical platform lift that would allow for access through the back of the home. The next day, we met again over the phone, this time with the contractor, to discuss the bathroom layout, as the veteran was gaining more insight and understanding of his own abilities and limitations. It was decided that the bathroom would be more like a wet room with nothing separating the roll-in shower from the rest of the bathroom. Then, after some progress had been made on the bathroom, we had another follow-up call to talk about grab bars. What kinds, how many, and where would they go? Another follow-up video with the veteran's wife helped to confirm the right threshold ramp measurements before ordering. After that, our next phone call was with the RAS vendor to review the veteran's custom commode chair configuration, again, prior to ordering. At some point in this process, it had been decided to move the vertical platform lifts into the garage in order to protect the lift from the elements and give the veteran more shelter when entering and exiting his home. Because of this change, the veteran's wife called us to discuss a potential barrier. There was a sharp turn that would need to be maneuvered if the veteran was going to be using the existing door in the garage. We got the dimensions from her and simulated that sort of setup space in our clinic. With this simulation, we realized that there wasn't going to be enough room for the veteran's power wheelchair to make it through. This meant the contractor was going to have to either move a wall and an entire electrical panel or put in a new doorway. And so a new doorway was cut. There was another brief video visit after the new doorway was done to measure that threshold. And then finally, a virtual walkthrough shortly before the veteran's discharge date to ensure everything was in place. So altogether, we're looking at 9 synchronous visits over the course of the veteran's 7-month inpatient stay. As far as advantages and disadvantages go for this home evaluation, there is obviously 0 travel time, which was great. But it also meant that I was relying a lot more on the others involved to complete the physical tasks and taking detailed measurements. What I have found with this is that some people are quite handy with tape measures, while others are easily overwhelmed. Same goes for technology use. Also, for me personally, spatial arrangement is difficult to assess over video. As someone who spends a lot of time in their right brain, it's hard for me not to have that 3D experience. Physically being in a space is what helps me to imagine how DME would look in that area of the home. In regard to follow-up visits, the best advice I can offer you is this: measure twice, order once, especially for threshold ramps. Also for this veteran, being a part of the process was a big deal for him. It was especially important because he enjoyed doing handiwork around his home before his injury. With our many virtual visits, he was directly involved in giving valuable input, sharing ideas, and supporting his wife in the planning and decision-making process. Researching tiles, sinks, and toilets gave him a sense of purpose and allowed him to feel connected to the renovation project. I do recognize that outside of the VA, it might not be feasible to have multiple virtual visits, but for this case, it worked and it allowed us time to problem solve, especially since we had the unique opportunity to help influence universal design within the home. Case number 2 is a recent example of our current hybrid practice taking place. This assistive technology case involves a veteran who's on my present caseload. He is a 54-year-old with complete tetraplegia at the C4 level due to a surfing accident in 2013. He is dependent in all of his ADLs and has a home health aide with him 24 hours a day. He's an incredible human and he enjoys sharing his story with others. Before the pandemic, he was working as a motivational speaker, but has since become a writer and is currently working on dictating his memoir. I first evaluated him in person in early December for splints with a plan to follow up virtually to assess assistive technology needs. We had our first virtual visit on December 30th, and the veteran's brother, who's involved in his care, also joined us on that call. During that appointment, the veteran reported his main goal was to be more independent in accessing his current devices and possibly being able to access a tablet or ECU system in the future. To give you an idea of his current setup, he has a Windows desktop with Dragon dictation software and an iPhone 11 that he's pairing with a Jabra Bluetooth speaker. He also has an Alexa in his home, which I accidentally activated over our most recent video call. Anyhow, all things considered, I ended up recommending that he trial the Glass House, and then we set up an in-person visit for him to do so. Our in-person visit on January 6th was successful, so I placed an order for the veteran to receive his own device. I was a little disappointed when I heard he didn't immediately pull it out of the box when it arrived, especially after he couldn't stop raving about it during our trial. He said he couldn't remember exactly how to pair it and asked if I was available to help walk him through the setup. So we scheduled a virtual visit the end of last week. With some help from his home health aide, we paired it up to his phone, no problem, and then worked on troubleshooting and positioning for him to use it on his computer. Our next virtual appointment is actually scheduled for this week, Thursday, to see how it's been going with the Glass House and go over ECU options that are compatible with his Alexa. One of the main advantages to this hybrid approach is that we're very fortunate to have a number of AT devices readily available so we can offer in-person trials and training in the clinic, as well as virtual tech support and troubleshooting when following up with the veterans at home. I was also grateful that his home health aide was so willing to help, but in doing so, we actually ended up taking her away from some of her cleaning tasks so she could help with our session. Also, not being able to be hands-on meant that I had to rely more directly on his home health aide to guide the troubleshooting process, which also took additional time. especially since the veteran has limited neck range of motion and an extra large 30-inch computer monitor to navigate. Case 3 is on our SCI peer support group and one of my personal favorites. The group has actually been going since April of 2013. It was started by my former colleague and one of our beloved psychologists. For a long time, the group was held every other Wednesday using the VA Vance phone line for private phone conferences. Sometime in 2018, I ended up taking over as the primary facilitator and continued running the group calls every other week until the height of the pandemic in 2020, which is when we switched to weekly meetings in order to offer more opportunity for social connection. It wasn't until we were a bit farther into the pandemic that I had a chance to transition our group from the phone line over to video calls through BBC. I included the veterans in this process and started by first reaching out with a quick survey. I was curious to know who had used BBC before, and if they hadn't, would they be interested? I wanted to know what smart devices the members had available to use, and I was ready to connect anyone without a device to our telehealth coordinator so they could apply for a VA-issued iPad. I was also quite curious to know how comfortable everyone would be participating in a group video session. Would they feel it was too personal? Would they welcome the connection? Or would any members want to opt out? Lastly, I left space for the veterans to reply openly and share any thoughts or concerns they might have. Here are a couple of the responses I received. One veteran had never used BBC before because he was an inpatient at the time, but still an active member in the group. He had his own iPad and iPhone, as well as his own personal hotspot. He was definitely interested in attending a group video visit, but being a high-level injury, he was concerned about having someone help to set him up each week with his device. Another outpatient veteran had already received a VA iPad and was accustomed to BBC visits since he lives down in Philly, but receives his spinal cord injury care with us in the Bronx. From his response, you can see he was excited for the social benefits. As a group, we discussed the survey results and future plans in our session over the phone on August 5th. It was a unanimous vote in favor of BBC. Once that was settled, I submitted the request for the BBC clinic, and the following week, our virtual peer support group was up and running. It was a wonderful thing to have everyone connected for the first time over BBC, and it continues to be something that the veterans look forward to attending each week. The obvious benefit here are the social interaction and sense of feeling connected, especially if you're someone in a high-risk category during a pandemic. Many of these veterans were not going outside their homes unless it was absolutely necessary. So our Wednesday group was a way for them to still feel like part of a community. Another benefit was that several of the veterans who had been coming to the group had never met in person before. So BBC allowed them to finally put faces to the names and voices they had been hearing on our conference calls. Other new injuries who have since joined the group have also had the advantage of seeing home modifications and getting firsthand advice from the other members. As far as disadvantages go, one veteran enjoys being outdoors and regularly joins in from his local park, although he does wear headphones and is respectful of privacy. Talking over the phone or talking over one another is more annoying than anything else. If everyone talks at once, then no one can hear. Even if just two people are talking at the same time, you can't hear. So I have to step in and moderate. Background noises can also be distracting, but as the group host, I can mute and unmute individual participants as needed. The last case example I have for you was started by one of our lovely PTs, Paulette Seals. Prior to the pandemic, she had started the Telerehabilitation group as a 12-week pilot program with specific pre and post tests to monitor the veterans' progress. However, when the pandemic hit, a number of our outpatients started requesting virtual workouts because community gyms were closed and they were mostly confined to their homes. Seeking an opportunity to stay active, as well as a sense of connection, many opted in for the virtual program and participation in the group tripled. Participant numbers have since gone back down to what they were pre-pandemic. However, the program is still being run on Tuesdays with an additional drop-in group on Thursdays for all those who have previously completed the 12-week program. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Madeline.
Thank you, Rachel. And I just quickly want to address, I accidentally scrolled a couple of the slides. I've been the one handling the slides. Sorry about that. Anyways, now I'm gonna just wrap up on a few points after going over how our telehealth rehab is being used in our facility over the past decade, and especially the past 3 years. Because of the pandemic, we really saw and experienced the advantages and disadvantages of telerehab. We see that it eases the surface access issues by decreasing commute time. There are people who live far away, or maybe they require medical support to get into the clinic to make their appointments. We have a lot of ALS patients who sometimes need oxygen tanks and ventilators, and they just overall have a decreased tolerance for travel. So we sometimes have to line all of our appointments with other disciplines, and that our time with them is kind of spread thin. So with tele-rehab, we're able to sometimes screen a lot of the needs first, so that when we do see them, it can be a more targeted approach. And then there are some people who, because we serve a large catchment area that we mentioned previously, it's just a lot easier for people to dial in virtually versus coming in person. We also save a lot of time if the issues that's being addressed is very minor, and the nature of it, we can just address with a virtual care visit. Then we save a visit. We can problem solve based on their home environment, and we can see exactly what issue that they're having, troubleshooting in real life scenarios. We can also involve family members. Sometimes because of work schedules or whatnot, sometimes we couldn't include a lot of family members in the past, but now we can, and we can include vendors. So it just allows a more opportunity for different stakeholders to be involved when we're intervening, providing interventions or equipment ordering. And because it's easy to do follow-ups with a quick dial on the phone or on the computer, it saves us a lot of logistical time. We don't have to close down the clinic for a certain amount of time. We're able to just dial in quickly and provide support. And we're able to make sure that they get all of their equipment that we provide is working for them in their home environment. Then, of course, with everything, there are limitations. And connectivity issues is more of an infrastructure issue, and very little in terms of what we can do. There are going to be times when connection is going to be spotty, even if the VA is able to provide a device with LTE connections. We know this in a lot of sessions, the difficulty comes from the home, and we have to problem solve on the fly. Maybe we need to do a quick phone call. Maybe we need to move to a different room. Maybe we need to use a different device. So we have to address those. Then there's limitations with technology. And that was a lot more present during the peak of the pandemic in 2020. But now IT is ready, and we've greatly built out our platform so that we can consistently use the VA platforms, which is encrypted, so it's more secure, the VA Video Connect. And then the next big thing is digital literacy and familiarity with technology, and that varies greatly. There are a lot of sessions, to be honest, where we're just telling the patient or the caregiver where to aim the camera, how to flip the camera. That takes a lot of time and sometimes can cause some frustration, but that improves over time. And actually, if it becomes too much of an issue, we're able to send our vendors in and it provides a consistent method in terms of how we're training our patients. Overall, the effectiveness of telerehab varies because of these variables in terms of the patient's family support, if cognitively they're able to follow our instructions virtually, if there are physical limitations, can they hold up and set up the camera? Are they able to do the exercises without physical assistance? Are they open to technology and this type of appointments? There's still a lot of people who will prefer face-to-face, in-person visits. And then lastly, the biggest limitation is the hands-on piece. Nothing is going to replace that. For example, it may take me 15 minutes to go over how to check for positioning the hips and seating versus just a quick lift and a hand check. This is why I believe that telerehab will likely never fully replace in-person visits. So just to sum up our telerehab uses throughout the years, we find that at James J. Peters VA Medical Center, our number of video visits significantly increased throughout the years and continue to trend upward. We hear that there's an increase in patient satisfaction. We're successfully able to perform equipment procurement and training. We're able to implement standardized tests and measures virtually. There's an increased ease in providing follow-up care. We use it a lot for wellness program because the VA is very big on the whole health approach. And overall, I think the bottom line is we feel that telerehab and in-person visits complement each other. Overall, we feel that for the future, telerehab and telehealth as a whole will continue to change. On the VA end, we see a lot of apps and equipment being developed. Like the Annie app is a health buddy with an avatar to assist the patient in their health. In the private sector, we see a lot of apps coming out, and I just listed one that we see a lot, the virtual seating coach. The VA supports purchasing a lot of equipment to make our telehealth program more successful and more robust. For example, we're encouraged to look into equipment to monitor heart rate and the O2 sats when the patients are performing exercises in real time. We are looking into cameras so that there's a higher definitions for physicians and nurses when they're monitoring wounds for when patients go home. And then overall, in preparation for this talk, I see that there's a growth in the amount of research articles looking at telerehab. One article that resonated with me states that we need to evaluate the effectiveness of telerehab as a method of providing care through the PACE framework, or the criteria of looking at population and health outcomes, access for patients, cost and cost effectiveness, the experience of clients and practitioners. So if we see these areas improve with our telerehab programming, then we know that we're providing evidence-based practice services for our patients. And that's all we have. So this is our reference. Any questions?
Madeline and Rachel, I just wanted to draw to your attention that there are a couple of comments already in the chat.
Okay, let me see over
Oh, thank you, Kendra. Thank you, Paulette.
there.
Nice to hear as well, Cheryl. Thank you.
When you, okay, there's a question from Liz. When you say wheelchair tech for contract where we have a company with a group of technicians, one who comes in every day to work with us on the chairs and ones who go out to the homes and repair their chairs. It doesn't matter which company. So that's one type of vendor that we would send out. And then another is for manufacturing, like Pride or Quantum and Permobile and Sunrise. Like we'll have those connections as well, and they go out as well to do some programming and adjustments. So it depends on the need. If they're able, so for example, if we're trialing equipment, they might have a chair for them to trial, and we'll go over those equipment with those manufacturers. Okay. I see some comments. I don't really see that many questions. Thank you, everybody.
This session's CEU code I will put into the chat is 1PNOAS. And just a reminder to stop the recording to the CVent staff. Great session. Thank you, Rachel, Madeline.
Thank you.